First of all, what's your name?
Cara.
Cara.
McManus. Do you need my last name?
Nice to meet you. I'm Cody.
Hi, nice to meet you,
Thanks
Cody.
for talking to us.
Sure.
So first of all, what's your relationship with the forest? How do you depend on the forest land in the United States?
Well, I mean, my husband and son and I go out in the forest all the time. I'm from Southern Oregon, which is resplendent in forest land. My dad is actually a retired wildland firefighting chief. He did it for about 30 years. So my family and I are, everybody uses the forest, the national forest, state forests, and we depend on them for, you know, getting outside. And just supplying our families with the outdoor space that we need. So,
Were you all affected by the forest fires recently?
well, yeah, I mean, being in Portland, it was unavoidable to all the smoke that was coming in. But yeah, just the heat waves and the endless smoke, and being in a city where everything is concrete and it just sticks, the smoke just stays and lingers, and it was really bad for my son, who was an infant at the time, and we couldn't leave the house. Uh, yeah, it was terrible. And even down where I'm from, the forest fires were really bad. Not only obviously for the environment, but it put a massive strain on my community. It's a small community in a national forest, and just put a massive strain with being able to provide land or provide space for all the forest fires, all the firefighters coming in from other areas. But just the community itself was just strained to the max. So, I mean, yeah, they're terrible.
Do you feel like we should do something to try to mitigate the impacts, or do you feel like they're more of a natural part of the forest ecosystem?
Well, obviously they're part of the natural forest ecosystem. In, I think it was the late 80s, Yellowstone had a really massive, terrible, terrible forest fire, and it was because they had done a no-burn policy for decades, and obviously there was just so much scrub on the ground that when inevitably a lightning strike hit it, it just went up like a tinderbox, and it just was a terrible fight. My dad actually had to go out and fight that fire. From Oregon. So obviously it's part of the natural ecosystem, but also global warming there's a terrible effect on it, obviously, and I mean, if you don't have any sort of support from the federal government in terms of just for the forest firefighters themselves, but then also the land management. I mean, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. I mean, Jesus Christ, look at California. They had forest fires in November, and they were terrible. They killed like 80 people. That's unheard of. We had was it 2 summers ago? There were forest fires in Astoria. It's right next to the ocean. Like, that's unheard of. Like, there are these events that just continue to happen, and it's you cannot stick your head in the dirt anymore and say that climate change isn't happening. So, yeah.
Just a couple more questions.
Sure.
Yeah, so who do you feel like is responsible? Or you're sort of starting to get into where the responsibility lies for that? Maybe where the responsibility lies in terms of doing some of that work?
Well, I think that certainly, I mean, there just needs to be more support from the federal level. If these are national forests, everyone enjoys them. They're not going to be around if you don't pay the people who put their lives on the lines to protect them. If you don't pay them anything. And there just needs to be more, not only does there need to be more financial support from the federal government, there needs to be obviously more psychological support. You can't have a freaking terrible catastrophe like in California just this past November and have the president tweeting that it's California's fault for mismanagement. If you don't give California any money to manage the forests, and then something like that happens, and then you say something like that, how do you expect anyone to have any faith in you as a leader to actually do something to sustain these forests? So yeah, I mean, I think obviously, I know that in Oregon, and I don't know about Idaho, but I know that in Oregon, our elected, certainly Merkley and Blumenauer and a couple other ones are very, very adamant about going to Washington each year and advocating for more money for not only the management of the forest, but also for the forest firefighters themselves. I don't know what it's like in Idaho. I'd hope it's the same thing, because that's another place where, the forests are at just as much of a risk as they are here and in California. So, but yeah, I think there needs to be more support from the federal level for sure.
Do you feel like there's a role or a place for the timber industry in doing some of this work, or what role in your mind the timber industry might have?
Again, this is a touchy subject. I'm from an old timber town, and
What town is that? Sorry to interrupt you.
It's called Glide. It's in southern Oregon, and near Roseburg, and that is a place that was hit very, very hard by the recession. Timber jobs were the lifeblood of the town, and the lumber mills were the lifeblood of Roseburg, and the jobs themselves they're disappearing, and you have a lot of families generationally who have been loggers, and I understand how hard that is for a family when there aren't a whole lot of other jobs around, when maybe all you have is a high school education, which is totally fine. I know how hard it is when those jobs disappear and there aren't a whole lot of other options to make good money and to work hard, make good money, and support your family. But at the same time, it has to be understood that the way that forests were used previously that provided those great incomes, we realize are not sustainable, and those jobs need to evolve as our theories of managing forests have evolved. And that's not to say that they need to be eliminated by any means. I mean, lumber is an important resource, but the management of it, and that might include. I don't know if necessarily loggers are going to go out and fight a bunch of fires. Logging is a terribly dangerous job, as is firefighting, and I don't know if a logger's going to want to jump onto a fire line and vice versa. But there are certainly, I think, if there were a more of an acceptance in green technologies that could also be used in conjunction with the timber industry, I think that there's a lot of space for loggers who want to continue in the industry and probably make better money and have it be a sustainable job for them and their ensuing generations. So I don't know about firefighters and loggers. I never even thought about that, but I don't know if you're going to be able to get a 60-year-old logger to jump on a fire line anytime soon.
Well, you talked about some of the techniques that are common, brush clearing, and
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm sure you know about thinning and prescribed burns. How do you feel about some of those techniques? Are there other techniques that are more disagreeable to you?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think that brush thinning. I think thinning forests of dead old growth, brush clearing, that sort of stuff, digging fire lines. That's all important stuff. I think that's how forests should be managed to prevent catastrophic wildfires when they inevitably are going to occur through human error or just lightning strikes, stuff like that. I honestly don't know if there are other ways to manage a forest besides that.
But I guess you wouldn't be against the timber industry maybe being one of the implementers of some of those techniques for any reason.
No, I think that you have a hard time convincing timber industries to get on board with that when there isn't a whole lot of financial impetus for them to do so. And I'm not trying to paint timber industries as a terrible, nefarious, entity by any means. I just think that, they make a lot of money doing what they do, and timber is a very vital resource. I don't know if there would probably have to be a pretty hefty motivation monetarily, possibly from the federal government, And I don't know if that's something the federal government's going to jump on anytime soon, when we're currently in the midst of decimating the EPA and all these other important organizations. So I get what you're saying. I don't know if that's realistically going to happen.
Thank you so much for your time.